You've got McAvaney, Cometti and Roberts. And then you've got these two, nuffies, living in denial. It's Crawf and Houghto. Welcome to the Fat Side Podcast.
Well, it's been a while since we've done one of these. We've been in lockdown, the second stage of COVID here in Victoria. It's the Fat Side Podcast. I'm Adrian Horton with Rob Crawford and a very special guest today.
Hello.
Mr. Matt Spangher. Spang, how are you?
Well, thanks, Adi. How are you?
Good, mate. As you said before, we're scratching the barrel a bit, you reckon, getting you on.
Yeah, absolutely. My God. Oh, well, as I sort of joking before, I know lots of people are out of work during COVID, but you must be down the bottom with the guest list here. This is pretty horrendous.
Nah, come on, Spang. We're going to beef up your credentials a little bit as we go through this podcast. But, mate, we were speaking about it off air, COVID. Now, you just moved back to Melbourne at the absolute best time, but let's not take the piss. Let's talk about life after footy for a little bit before we go back through your career. So you hung up the boots end of 16. What have you been doing for the last 3 or 4 years, Spang?
Yeah, so straight after footy, I actually went and worked at Netball Australia for about 18 months. So I'd always had a fascination with the commercial side of sport, particularly, and sports management. So an opportunity arose through Netball Australia, through an internship I was doing in my final year there. And yeah, worked in their partnerships team. So it was really good fun, learned a fair bit, probably became vastly aware of all the stuff that I just wasn't even possibly aware of whilst being a footballer you're not exposed to. Small skills, but bigger conversations as well. And then after 18 months there, I had an opportunity through actually my wife's work. She got a fellowship over in the UK at a hospital over there. So we packed up and moved to London for 2 years and continued my work over there, working for a sports agency, which was a bit of fun too. So some of our clients were pretty closely aligned to the Premier League and got a few cheeky benefits from that, which was good. So, but that all came to an end pretty much the end of January. And I had a role lined up at Collingwood Football Club, actually, and started working there for a couple of months. And then all this happened with COVID. So had to quickly scramble, and I was lucky enough to get another role working at Flybuys back as a commercial manager. So similar sort of capacity, partnership management, executing marketing campaigns, things of that nature.
Now, I know, Rob, you'll have a go at me for doing this because you don't like me crossing over codes, but Spang just spoke about Premier League clubs. So just a cheeky one, Rob. I want to know. Just a quick one. Who were some of the clubs that you're in contact with?
I was specifically working with Spurs through their AIA partnership, and
Rob.
Also Chelsea through a few of their partnerships.
Oh, Rob! Gee, you've just 2 punches. I'm an Arsenal fan, Matt, so don't we might have to end the call right there, to be honest. Still though, did you meet many of the players or anything like that, or go to a few games?
Yeah, I was lucky enough. Went to a few games, particularly Spurs. They were a really good client in terms of AIA, so we were lucky enough that particularly the midweek games, they were handing out the tickets in the new stadium, which was good. I actually lived in North London in the shadows of Highbury, so I mean that's something. So as a result, I've probably become a Spurs fan. So that's a little bit more cement on the dagger, I suppose. There,
yeah.
But it was enjoyable.
You've chosen it, mate. So good luck. Enjoy supporting Spurs. It's a lot of fun, I can gather.
It's a poison chalice. Yeah. It's the definition. We'll get stuck into your childhood, Spang. We'll go back through your career. I was saying it to you before. I knew you as a D's fan. I knew you as my brother's mate, basically. But I didn't know a hell of a lot about, the inner workings of your upbringing. So just take us through that. Was it a pretty standard upbringing? Was there anything exciting that happened when you were a little tacker?
Yeah, mate, honestly, relatively staple, I guess, in terms of upbringing, which is a good thing. Mum and dad. I grew up out in Donvale. Mum and dad are still out there, and as a result, went to school sort of in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, and went to the same schools, obviously yourself, Adi, and your brother. So Xavier College, which was a great experience and sort of provided a few fair few opportunities and a good sports program in general. But was lucky enough that my junior career was based more in effectively the outer eastern suburbs. So it was a nice sort of mix for me, having the school kids, schoolmates in terms of more the private school sector of eastern suburbs Melbourne, and then probably more the blue collar footy friends from the eastern suburbs. So it was a nice blend, and I really enjoyed playing footy in those leagues. And then lucky enough at the end of school, I had an extra year running on my under 18s year. So I finished school as a 17-year-old and just spent a whole year playing footy for Eastern Rangers out there, and then lucky enough got drafted.
We'll talk a bit about the draft. 2005, West Coast take you at pick 34, which is an interesting one because they've obviously come off a grand final and then went on to win the following year. Can you talk to us about getting picked up, what that was like? Did they build you up much expectation? Or just said, do your thing?
Yeah, it was it's an interesting one. So the year before, West Coast was one of the few clubs that spoke to me as a 17-year-old. So I knew there was a level of interest there, but they did indicate that it was more than likely going to be the following season, if at all. And then, so in terms of anticipation, I probably was quietly, when I say quietly confident, was hopeful more than anything, as opposed to cemented in confidence, I suppose, of getting drafted. There's always an element of doubt. But I was, when the name got read out, ecstatic. Like it was probably a little bit of bittersweetness in terms of going away from Melbourne, your family and friends, but ultimately I was so keen to play footy, it wasn't a big deal. So it was a great experience. And then it all happens pretty quickly. Like I think get drafted that was a Saturday back then, and then I was on the plane Friday morning.
Can you tell us about your first impressions walking into that club? Because this is, a golden era for the Eagles. Cousins, Judd, Cox, Embley, Kerr, Glass, like you can just keep reeling off these names. What was it like coming in as a young guy and looking at, the best of the best in the competition?
Yeah, I still remember one of my first impressions. You walk through the corridor of the club and you're getting walked through by, at the time, like the player welfare manager, and he's doing introductions. All the players themselves come up and introduce themselves. And, I remember seeing Juddy in the hallway, and he said, "Oh, g'day, mate, I'm Chris." And in my head, I just remember thinking, obviously I know you're Chris. But you just sort of you just be polite and just sort of, sort of try not to make too much of a fool of yourself, at least initially. That was my reaction. But honestly, it was a little bit overwhelming. Like the first sort of week or two, any time on the track where if you made a mistake or a skill error, it was a little mini thought in the back of my mind going, "Oh, geez, these guys must think I'm absolute spuds." But to their credit, and this is the same with all the clubs I've been involved with, I mean, everyone's pretty quick to make you feel pretty welcome, and they've got their own different ways in which they do that. But for the most part, you feel like one of the boys and one of the players pretty quickly. So
in 2006, you played, I think it was only one waffle game for East Freo, and you had a groin injury that kept you out for the whole season. So on a personal level, on the playing field, not a great way to introduce yourself to the club, Spang. But you talk about some of those names before. Who were some of the big players or the well-regarded players that took you under your wing and tried to make you feel welcome at the club? Who were those guys?
Yeah, I suppose initially, I mean, it was probably the players that weren't big names that took me under their wing, and that was purely just based on being in rehab for almost the entire first season. So I did carry a bit of an injury from my under 18s through to my first year in the system, and unfortunately, it was a pretty fashionable injury at the time. It was osteitis pubis that I required surgery for, and then pretty much once you signed up for the surgery, you could write the season off. So I pretty much knew what I was in for, which made it a bit easier. But as a result, I was in rehab with Damien Adkins and Brad Smith, who Damien Adkins played roughly 70-odd games, and you could throw Travis Gasper in that as well. But they were really great, and they probably taught me a lot of lessons about how to handle yourself professionally in rehab, which, as I suppose, like would have it, my career was relatively riddled with those sorts of scenarios. So it was good to sort of set the bar about what it takes to do rehab at a level of professionalism that's accepted at that level. So that was a good lesson. But in terms of the big names, certainly Darren Glass was one, and being a key defender, he's always one that was happy to work with you and talk to you. And he also lived relatively close But I must admit the guys were pretty focused. So it was amazing to sort of see I suppose, the resolve in the group after having lost 0-5. You could tell there was a fair bit of an agenda. So there was a fair bit of learning on my part just through observation alone. Obviously, from a footy aspect, there's well documented off-field stuff with that group, but certainly a lot of good football lessons.
Yeah, definitely. 05 grand final is the only one I've been to, just because half of my family go for the Swannies, and I just took up the opportunity to take a free ticket at the granny that my uncle got me, and it was an amazing experience. I'll never go back to a grand final again because my thing, Spang, is Melbourne have to play in one, so can't imagine that's ever going to happen in my entire lifetime or the rest that I have to live. But just on the 06 experience, what was that like, knowing that you'd had a difficult season personally in your first year and you weren't able to get out in the park, and as you said, you're in rehab, but what was it like just to be a part of the squad and the club when they'd broken that fairly lengthy drought? Because of course, people who might not know, West Coast was such a powerhouse in the mid-90s, and I guess a lot of fans could say it took them a little bit too long to win their next flag. So what was it like being a part of that?
Yeah, well, it's an amazing scene to be a part of. I mean, no matter what year you're able to do it along your career. But for me, I probably didn't sink in as much as the importance and the rarity of it being your first year. I mean, you suppose you rock up and you just take everything as it comes. Like you absorb as much as you can in your first few years of footy, or certainly that was my attitude. And then to sort of have a front row seat to that journey was certainly a great experience. And it's interesting, some of the observations you probably realise you've seen, upon reflection, a couple of years later down the facts. For example, players who miss out on the day, seeing how it affects them, seeing how the group holistically celebrates, but also tries to get around guys who are unlucky or feel hard done by, and then the same thing for those guys who are on the fringe. How they then make sure it's not about them; it's about a bigger process of winning the flag, and not to feel too sorry for themselves. So it's a really interesting sort of week, and when over half the squad doesn't get to celebrate, really, it's a really interesting way. Even though it's a holistic club celebration, sometimes it doesn't necessarily resonate with all 45 players on the list.
Quickly, what was the Mad Monday like? Was it berserk?
Yeah, most of them back then were all pretty enthusiastic, I'd suggest. But it's a Mad Monday has definitely tapered off as football became more professional. So the guys enjoyed their time, that's for sure.
I can think of a few operators.
Yeah, there's definitely a couple in that group. 2007, spent a whole year playing with East Freo, and then 2008, the long-awaited debut, funnily enough, against Sydney. The team didn't get the result, but how were you? Were you absolutely shitting yourself coming to your first game, or do you feel like you're ready to go?
Yeah, definitely. I was really excited. I felt there was naturally a little bit of nerves, but I ultimately felt like I was ready to go. Having a couple of years in the system, certainly wasn't concerned about the physicality of the game. And so that was like an element, because when I got drafted, I was definitely underweight. So a big priority for mine was to get to an adequate size to play the game. And then, interestingly enough, the game itself is probably more famous for an infamous incident involving Barry Hall and Brent Staker more than anything.
Yes.
So,
of course.
And that happened relatively early, which meant that I pretty much had to go and play backline for most of the day. So it was kind of one of those things. The instructions were effectively, mate, we need you out there, so just do your best. So it wasn't too bad.
Why didn't you get a square up? You could have helped Staker out, mate. It's only Barry Hall.
I mean, there's a lot of things I'm happy I haven't done in life, and that's definitely one of
them. Now, this is one that I'm always interested to ask, as I'm an Essendon supporter. Tell me about your experiences with John Worsfold, because he's certainly divided Essendon fans in his older life. He's very political in the way he responds in the media and doesn't really give much. But tell us about your experience with John, because you obviously at the club for a few years. You were there at the absolute high, and then did taper it off a bit from there. But tell me about your experience with John Worsfold.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got a different journey, right? So mine was probably not terrific, nor was it terrible. Like it was probably adequate for where I sat on terms of the list at that time. So, which different coaches have different methodologies, right? So for me, he was very direct in terms of when he spoke to you. To the frequency of communication probably wasn't adequate enough for blokes on the fringe, is my opinion. But
yeah,
that was just my interpretation of it. So you ask someone else, and they'll definitely give you a different answer. But yeah, I think at the time, certainly, particularly 06. His brand of football very much suited the way the game was at, particularly, and the way he played, particularly carried through to coaching in terms of that physicality and certainly that mental tough attitude of pushing through pain barriers and winning one-on-one contests. And then probably as the game evolved to be a bit more tactical and a bit more related to zoning and team pressure, things like that, probably didn't resonate in terms of where we needed to be regarding the competition position. But and then by the time I left, I couldn't really speak to you about what happened after that, really. But, I can understand the positioning in terms of being a polarizing figure, but there's definitely, you can say that about anyone, really.
Absolutely.
I think that the thing, though, Rob, is Rob, just for context sake, Matty runs the Sash podcast, and they've got a big community on social media as well. And it's quite enjoyable, actually, going on the Essendon Sash page after losses just to read some of the comments and just revel in their misery as a Melbourne fan. But I've noticed a lot over the journey, and I'm probably speaking for you a little bit here, Rob, that a lot of Essendon fans are upset with John because he doesn't show a lot of emotion. And then the last couple of games, you can see him smiling on the bench after a draw and a loss last week. So what did you feel like he was a motivator, Matt? Did you feel like he was an inspirational figure, or is he just not cut from that cloth?
Again, I can only speak from my perspective, right? So certainly there's nothing that I've got a small sample size. I've got a caveat with that, right? I think I only played 26 odd games under Woosher at the Eagles. So, but in that time, we weren't exactly the powerhouse club that we had come from my first 2 years at the club. So I don't recall hearing any overly motivational speeches or anything, in the breaks or anything like that were for me. But as I said, that's only 26 games out of 5 seasons. So there's a lot of other players who have very different opinions. I know the guys who played under him during those successful eras, they really bat for him and they really resonate with his messaging. So one person can't be across 45 people. I don't think that's possible. So yeah. I think what makes a good senior coach a lot of the time is the ability to delegate or to make sure the deputies have got strong relationships. So if, for example, probably fast forwarding a bit on maybe your questions, but talk about what I felt was one of the strengths at Hawthorn was that Clarkson's secondary assistants, that we had had really great relationships with the players. Not to say that Clarko didn't or doesn't, but if you weren't getting the answers for what you need directly from the horse's mouth, at least you got the next closest thing. Whereas we had a few senior assistants at the Eagles probably who didn't necessarily have that strength. So I found that was probably more challenging than hearing it from Woosher himself.
Yeah, well said. And end of 2009, you want to move back to Victoria, and then the Eagles want you to hang around. You sign a 1-year deal. You play the 8 games, and then they put you on the scrap heap. Did you feel like it was a bit rough, or do you feel like they'd made the right call? Were they looking at the future, trying to mould a different team? Like, what actually happened there, and what were their reasons for letting you go?
Yeah, I think at the time, I certainly thought it wasn't the right call. No one likes to get delisted, and you certainly don't want to be in that position. But if I'm thinking, again, with the power of hindsight, it made absolute sense. There's no way I could, hand on heart, say that the 3 players, or probably the 4 players, that including Darren Glass in that respect, who are playing a similar position, I was ahead of, and those other 3 are all mates of mine, like in terms of Mackenzie, Schofield, and Mitch Brown. So it's not they were all much more adequate players than me in that last season. And then in terms of a footy aspect, it was the right call. But it doesn't make, as I said, it doesn't make it any less tough to hear. I certainly didn't believe that I wasn't good enough to play footy. I knew that I had the ability. I probably just was after a little bit more opportunity. And I think at that stage I hadn't played more than 3 games in a row, and that's probably, a bit of a reflection on some of my own form. But at the same time, I felt that a lot of the players were getting a bit more of an opportunity to grind it out over 5 to 10 weeks, where it probably takes that time, whereas I just hadn't had that yet.
Swannies pick you up in the next time you go to the draft the following year. 2011, you play 5 games and then can't really break into the team 2012, which is, fair enough, obviously another premierships team. Why didn't you think you cut up the Swans?
If I'm being honest about the Swans, it was probably more injury than anything. I think my first 3 months there, so I did pretty much all the pre-season, and then I was unlucky enough to tear my quad probably about 3 weeks out from the start of the year, and turned out to be about a 16-week injury.
Wow.
And by the time I got back on the field, it was good. I was playing some good. This is going back to 2011.
Yeah.
Was playing some good footy in the reserves and was really enjoying it. I must admit, actually found a fair bit of enjoyment back in playing footy, which is always a challenge after probably having a less than successful year the year before. And then funnily enough, found a role as a forward at the Swans, just by sheer luck of some of our opponents in the NEFL. We basically were playing one of the teams one day, and I think we kicked 60 points to 1 or something in the first quarter, and they just said swap ends at quarter time, like the old primary school sort of gig, and then went forward just to get a bit of ball, really, and ended up having a decent hit. So it was a bit of which was good, like a string to the bow in terms of versatility. And then
how many did you kick? You kicked 10 or something, didn't you? You're covering something.
I kicked 6. So nice. Then sort of stayed forward the next few weeks, and then lucky enough. When I say lucky enough, for my own position, LRT was actually having a bit of an injury-riddled season himself in 2011, and the role that he would normally play in the team became available. So got to play the back end of the last 5, or roughly the last 5 games, give or take, with the Swans, and including some finals. So was absolutely considered myself to sort of be within their starting 22, if not the top 25 at the list going into 2012. And then unfortunately just had a dreadful run with hamstring injuries in 2012. And I think by the time I kept coming back, I think I was named emergency against Essendon one game. And then, Horse just said to me, "Oh, mate, we think you just need one more in the reserves," and then ended up tearing my hamstring again in that game. So, and then that just started the cycle again. And then, it was just kind of on the fringe, really. So, in terms of why I left then, it was kind of one of those things where I thought I probably needed 2 years of a contract to get my body right. I probably lost faith in a little bit of my body after effectively 3 years of soft tissue injuries. And Sydney, to their credit, offered me a 1-year contract, and manager said that Hawthorn have got a 2-year contract on the table, and I just did the sums. That was what it came to, and I'd had some exposure to Hawthorn a couple of years prior, actually, when in between being drafted to Sydney and being delisted from the Eagles, I actually trained at the Hawks and met Clarko through that period. So felt it was a good club, liked the way that the message was coming from Clarko and the others. So the move, and being based in Melbourne and being a Melbourne boy, it made it a little bit easier as well.
We talked about it before with West Coast. You watched on and saw some of your peers and the members of the 22 win a flag, and then you have to go through it all again, as Rob was alluding to before. Spang, how does that feel again? Just knowing that you've been through the rigmarole with these horrible injuries. You seem to get yourself on the park. You play yourself into form. You get into the team, then you're out of the team again. It's just this vicious cycle, and then you have to witness another flag that you're a part of the club, but you're not in the 22. Was it kind of just a bittersweet moment, or were you starting to think, as a professional athlete, I'm a little bit cursed?
I never thought the word curse never really sort of entered it. It was, but I must admit, it was definitely tough to cop. Again, like you probably ask someone that, everyone's got their own different versions of reality. But I mean, I said, from my perspective, I felt that if my body was right, I would have been playing semi-regularly, maybe not every game or something like that, but would have been thereabouts. Whereas I was probably way off in the end just due to that factor. And so I probably was never really close. So I'm sure if you ask, some of the senior coaches, they'd probably say that. But me personally at the time felt that I was close if my body was right. So it did hurt a bit to miss that. But having said that, everything's relative, right? And things put in perspective. That same season, I'm sitting next to Benny McGlynn, who's legitimately in the side and tears his hamstring and doesn't get to play. So that put things in a lot of perspective. And there was actually a little bit of a cohort of the guys who missed out, who probably spent some time together in the days after the win, when the players who do play have got their own responsibilities that they've got to adhere to. We sort of broke off and just misery probably lost company a little bit in that respect. Got it all out of our system, and then made sure we were able to join the boys again and make sure it wasn't about our misery, but the celebration of the club. And I think we did that towards certainly after a day or two, and then we were able to enjoy the week for what it was, which is ultimately a great moment for any club.
Now, 2014, special time, of course. Have a good, make me way into the team, and then you get picked for the 2014 grand final, and obviously the Hawks go on to win it. Two-part question. Talk to me about actually finding out that you've been named for the grand final, obviously not the year before, and then going on to win it. How was that?
Yeah, you talk about, this is probably circling back to what I was talking about before in terms of just knowing Clarko having an innate ability to know the players a little bit. So for me, my preliminary final was pretty ordinary, if I'm being honest. It was probably the worst game I played that year. We'd snuck over the line. Obviously, Port were steaming home towards the back end, and we luckily held on. But I played poorly. I played nervous, really, if I'm being honest. It's probably the game I was most nervous about, and that was probably part and due to the fact that I knew I was so close to playing in a grand final. Plus, I'd missed a couple of weeks earlier. I'd had a rest. I didn't fly to Perth against Freo because my calf was a bit sore, and I was probably hanging on, to be honest, to get to the end of the year, which is a bit of a sad thought considering I've only played 15 games that year, but that was kind of the nature of where I was at. So I probably played a little bit nervous and apprehensive, which almost, in my opinion, would have affected my spot. But Clarko, to his credit, rang me. It was either Monday evening or Tuesday morning. It was certainly very early in the week, and just said, he said, like, he used to call me Striker. Just said, Striker, mate, don't worry about it. Like, you're playing this week. I just want you to just sit back, enjoy the week for what it is, and get your head right. I'll see you out there. I'll see you tomorrow, or whatever it was. And that was an awesome feeling, obviously, but it also allowed me to actually prepare properly, but also take in everything that week is, because it is different, and there's some great experiences that you should absorb as much as you can throughout that week, which, had I been distracted about selection, may not have had the opportunity to do so.
Now, looking at your stats over your career, 2006, you've rolled into West Coast and they've won a flag. 2011-12, you're at Sydney, they've won a flag. And then you've been at Hawthorn through a three-peat. Now, we're talking about a curse. I think it's the opposite. I think you've got a bit of a lucky power about you, Matty. So you say you're in sports marketing. Can you maybe go get a role at Essendon, please? Because I think we need a bit of the Spangher magic in the era out at Tullamarine.
Geez, my family would be happy for that. Most of them are diehard Essendon fans, so we'll wait and see what the future holds.
Very good, Rob. Very good. I don't mind that. You're drawing a long bow, but we'll let you have it. Just on Clarko, striker, first thing. Why? Why striker?
Yeah, well, it depends on who you ask, I think. A few of the boys used to call me that. Like Ruffy used to call me Ibra after Ibrahimovic, and then...
nice.
But yeah... it was, I think it was against St Kilda, 2013 maybe. Yeah, 2013 playing St Kilda. I scored a goal by kicking off the ground, and I think Dennis Committee's call was something along the lines of, with the grace of an Argentinian striker, and then Clarko's obviously listened to that, and he's just run with it. So, but to be clear, like that was kind of one of his methods. I'm sure it still is. He had these. No one else called me that, and no one else does call me that, and it was just one of his things, I suppose, to develop a personal connection with the players. Like, it doesn't have to be anything more special than that. But it's just, he had a few of those with a couple other players and things like that no one else really used.
Yeah, we had a good chat to Brad Sewell. God, it feels like ages ago, Rob. A few months ago, talking about Clarko and his influence on the group. And he spoke about that he felt early in the piece he probably didn't form that connection with a lot of players. He was a little bit too, I guess, come in, do the work, go home, come in, do the work, go home. And he didn't spend enough time trying to nurture those personal friendships with the players. But as he got a little bit older, he started to get, I guess, a little bit more intimate with the players in a healthy sense, and really started to build that connection. And Rob and I were fortunate enough to interview Alistair for the No Merger podcast that we did, which documents the Melbourne Hawthorn merger of 96. And Rob and I would have been happy to get 10 minutes from him, Spang, and I think we ended up speaking to him for nearly an hour. And
2 hours, actually. We did,
was it?
We did one recording, and it stuffed up, and it sounded terrible. And we hit him up again. We're like, Clarko, please, we need to get you on. Like, you're vital to this story. And luckily, this is when there was no AFL, so he had spare time, and he was like, all right, yeah. And it was like 8:30 on a Tuesday night, and we were like, oh, look, we've made the script really, like, we've, got all the questions for you, pre-planned. We can do this in 20 minutes. Like, 2 hours later, it's like 10:30 at night. Clarko's probably had a few glasses of red, and he's still going on about the merger in 96. And I'm like, he's a good bloke. He's a good bloke, old Clarko.
It was unbelievable, and he's an encyclopedia. Like, some of the things that he was drawing out, like, he could almost tell you what the injury list for the D's was back in 96 when he was playing for him. It was incredible. But the thing that got me about Clarko and really hit Rob and I was just his footy brain and the way it works. And he told us a few things about game style and a few things off the record that we didn't include in the series because it didn't make sense. But it was just fascinating to hear from him. And I think Rob and I went away going, oh, okay, I get it now. You understand why he's successful because he's so much in the detail. And we just thought it was, a great experience to obviously interview the great man for as long as we did. So what about your personal experience?
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that stuff about being in the detail. And again, it's probably more a reflection on where I was at, I think, in my career, or maybe a combination of the two. But certainly my time at the Hawks, our game style and I suppose the effort we put into learning different ball movements and different defensive structures was, well, to me, it was more than what I'd experienced at the other two clubs at the time. Again, maybe it's more a reflection on where I was potentially at in terms of my career and my maturity as a combination factor of that. But and it was also probably due to the fact that I was at Hawthorn openly expected to learn both forward and defensive structures, given I could go both ends of the field. So but that was a kind of Clarko's pretty well renowned for making players to be a little bit more versatile than they otherwise would and learn other positions. And the flow-on benefit of that is that on game day, because even if I'm not playing forward, I know where the forward should be standing. So structurally, my communication can increase and I can relay that down the line because I know I can see something's wrong. And it just kept me in the game a lot more. Whereas if I was unaware of, positioning at a stoppage from a wingman or something because I had no idea about it, like how could you possibly communicate? So for me, that was an added benefit for my game style. And then when you play in the reserves down at Box Hill at Hawthorn, you really could drive that and practice your leadership skills that you're expected to carry with you when you come to the seniors as well. So I think that isn't necessarily like a specific, I suppose, tutorage of Clarko, but that was probably Hawthorn as a structure that I felt beneficial. And even my small exposure, I should say, to it at Collingwood, it seems to be resonating now amongst most of the clubs that seems to be the way to go, to be more holistically aware of what the game plan is so you can contribute where you need to be rather than working in silos a little bit more. So, but that was something I first got exposed to at the Hawks. And And for me, that was a big part of our success in general. Not just, I mean, there's many other factors, including some of the cattle we had, and but it was, for me, it was everyone being able to actually know what we were doing.
Now, Spang, when you were playing, you had a pretty berserk look going on with the locks. You've cleaned it up a little bit more. It's nice to be talking to someone who you've probably had a shave in the last couple of days, so that's nice. But you were called Fabio on, I think it was 3AW. I think they coined it, and then I remember seeing a Facebook page that was floating around. I think it was Sir Matthew Spangher as well, and you certainly built a genuine cult status down at the Hawthorn Football Club. Did you just go along with it? Did you soak it up? Did you embrace it? Or did you just think it was nonsense?
Oh, I think I went through ebbs and flows of all those emotions, to be honest. No, definitely there was moments where you just couldn't help but laugh and appreciate that, that you to the fans that you were something probably more than you ever perceived yourself to be. I didn't really think too much of it. I certainly didn't grow the hair and the beard by any level of design to achieve that level, but no, it was very fun. Like it made for great entertainment, certainly at family days and community clinics and things like that, where probably in years gone by where kids would never know who you were, because then nor should they, when you're scraping to get a game and things like that. Whereas, they would then run up to you and want your autograph and things like that. Well, it was special, like they're little special moments of being a professional athlete. And, I remember when the shoe was on the other foot when I was a kid, like recognising a player was a huge thing, and I loved it when they were able to give me some time. So things like that were really cool. So then that's when you embrace it a bit more. But in terms of into any of the social media pages and any of that sort of stuff, probably less so, I'd suggest.
This is an interesting one. What's the biggest difference between the three clubs that you played at?
Nothing. They all won flags, Rob.
Just you can take this wherever you want. It could be about the culture. It could be about the fans. It could be about where what city of Australia you're in. What was the biggest difference?
Yeah, I mean, other than geographic and the colour palette, the other probably the biggest difference, and this again like an oversimplification, but I mean, when I got to the Eagles, for example, we were taught pretty heavily that the club was a brand. Like that was one of my first meetings was with and it should be done in terms of like meeting people from the front office, not just the football department. But I found it interesting that I'd met the head of marketing before I'd met my line coach. So like there was just kind of an interesting aspect of where the club was at, and maybe that's in hindsight probably a bit of indicative where they were at holistically at the time. But then going to Sydney, it was the complete opposite. It was a club that obviously was playing football in a non-football environment, and it had very much a local club kind of feel within the locker room, not certainly outside that, but the guys really looked after each other, and it was about the performance of the club, and the Bloods culture was spoken about a lot, and it was expected to be lived up to. And then coming down to Hawthorn, it was probably a combination of the two. They were probably aware of where they were at in terms of their presence in the market, but they were also they take a lot of pride in being a family club and bringing that in to the inner walls. So if I'm oversimplifying the differences of the clubs, like in the feel that I felt at all of them, that's probably it.
Well said.
That's such a good summation. Thank God you didn't go to Melbourne. Thank God. Because when you think about it, 06 all the way through to when do you wrap up? 16. Yeah, we were effectively shithouse the whole time you played your footy career, Matt. So luckily you didn't go to Melbourne because they ruined a lot of careers. I just want to ask you a quick one before we actually do a quiz. I think we've surprised him here, Rob. We didn't give him the heads up on the quiz, but
no.
I just want to know, of the three clubs, you can pick one bloke from every club. Who was the funniest bloke? Who had the most charisma?
Most charisma?
Or just the funniest bloke, or the biggest piss taker or smart ass or whatever. We'll just throw a blanket over. Just one from each club, please.
So in terms of from the Eagles, in terms of charisma, like Sam Butler or Bo Waters were good. They're good mates, but always good for a laugh. Probably Butsy, really enjoyed, like a really good clubman, and yeah, always read the room relatively well. But actually, you can throw like Dave Rapunda, and that was hilarious. And yeah, he was great value. And just had some really random gags that he kept running, like refer to himself as Denzel all the time, and just like things like that were just great. But really, great around the locker room. And then at the Swans, actually, Louis Jetta is great for a laugh. I'm sure he's continued that all the way through the Eagles, but he was unreal around the room. But Reece Shaw was really good for that as well. And actually Ty Kennelly. So I know I've probably given you more than one for those, but they kind of all bundle together as good larrikins.
Hang on, just on the Swans, what was that dickhead Alex Johnson like? He's a good friend of mine, but I heard he was a bit of a prankster, I hear.
Yeah, he was. I had 2 great years with Jono. We were obviously drafted the same year together, and the worst thing that could have ever happened to an already extremely confident young man was for him to win a flag in his first 2 seasons.
Oh, I know.
He definitely got louder, but God, I don't think you'd meet someone who doesn't like Jono and his attitude. So it's tolerable, that's for sure.
Yeah. Nice.
And then the last one, the Hawks. Look, Izzy Smith's pretty good for some banter around the locker room. And it's hard to move past Ruffy, actually. Like they're probably the 2 that sort of stand out in terms of guys around the locker room, but that I enjoyed and always brought the group up, I think.
Nice. Very good. Rob, the floor's yours, mate. I'm done.
Beautiful, beautiful. So this is the quarantine quiz that we've been playing with our guests. Now, it's season 2, so it's a completely clean slate. We're starting again. There's no leaderboards. You're the first one up on the leaderboard for season 2.
Tell him about season 1, though. Tell him about the leaderboard.
Season 1 was pretty good. Tom Nichols won with 9 out of 10, but I've been accused of giving him questions that were way too easy.
God.
So what we're doing instead is I'm going to give the same 10 questions to each guest. They're not going to change. So it's a bit of a mix. Some are footy related, some are just random trivia questions, and then there's one about yourself at the end. So,
well, I think that could be one I get wrong, I reckon.
Yeah. Question number 1: who was the first Prime Minister of Australia?
I do know this. Barton.
That is correct. Well done. Question 2. This is multiple choice, so I'll read them all out. Which country's alphabet has the most characters, as in like the most letters? Is it A, China?
Crack before
Go.
Is it Hungary?
That is incorrect. Wasn't even in the multiple choice. I love the confidence.
Got ahead of himself.
No, because I remember. Sorry to pivot on the quiz there, Rob. But my wife and I went for a walking tour once, and they said there was 40 letters in the Hungarian alphabet, and that's the only thing I remember.
Okay.
I just refuse to believe there's more letters and more.
Cambodia has 74, so there you go. So
I wouldn't even have picked that even if that was in the multiple choice, to be honest.
There you go. Question 3: who holds the record for the most goals kicked in an AFL VFL match?
Fred Fanning.
Yes.
Correct. He kicked 18 goals. Question 4: what year did The Simpsons first start on TV?
Ooh.
I'm going to go with 89.
That is correct. Well done. Question 5.
Pull that out of your ass.
The original 1908 Richmond FC jumper was yellow and black with, this is multiple choice, A, vertical stripes, B, horizontal stripes, C, yellow sash, or D, half black, half yellow.
I'll just go vertical stripes.
Oh,
That is correct. Well done. Question 6. Who is the only AFL player to kick 500 goals, have 600 hit-outs, and 600 tackles in their career?
Ooh.
Good question.
I'll give you a clue. It's modern era, so it's post 1990. So it's in the modern AFL era.
Yeah, I'm leaning towards an Eagles ruckman. I'll just say I'll go Coxie.
Incorrect. Someone you did play with, Jared Roughhead.
Oh,
Your mate Ruffy.
Ruffy.
He had that many hit-outs.
He played a couple of seasons in the ruck, and he had one season where he had about 250 hit-outs, which is insane to think. But it shows that he was, everyone talks about how great Lance Franklin is, but I'd almost say that Ruffy could do more, to be honest. Question 7. Which country has won the most FIFA World Cups?
Brazil.
Yes.
That is correct. Question 8, another multiple choice.
Oh, you love your multiple choice. What's with the multiple choice, Rob?
It makes a hard question, more gettable for people. An ocelot is a type of A, an antelope, B, a wild dog, C, a wild cat, D, a bird of prey.
Wild cat.
Wild cat is correct.
Oh,
he's a sharp one.
This is a good start.
Question number 9. Who is the first Aboriginal player to win a Brownlow medal?
Here we go.
These are great questions.
You're on the clock. 5 seconds.
Look, it's probably wrong, but I'll go with Goodsy.
Incorrect. Before Goodsy, 993, Gavin Wanganeen.
Oh, Gavin Wanganeen, of course.
And the final question, how many goals did you kick in your AFL career?
I knew I wouldn't know this one. This is me buying time, but I'll tell you a little bit of a story. I actually got this question on my Bucks party, and I think I got it wrong then. I had to pay the penalty, and I obviously haven't learned the lesson. I'm leaning towards 11 or 13, but somewhere in that realm.
Yeah, you got to pick one.
I'm going to go with 13.
Oh, he's done it.
13 is correct. Well done. Setting the bar very high. 7 out of 10.
That's actually
People
phenomenal.
have something to compete with now.
That's phenomenal. So 7 would have placed you second on last season's.
On last season's quiz. So well done. But it's a new season. Everyone's going to get the same questions. Obviously, the goals will change depending on who we have on. But well done. You set the bar high. I'm very impressed.
Yeah.
The same questions, Rob. Does that mean that if someone does listen to the podcast, they know the answers? Or am I misreading this?
Oh, no one listens to this, Spang.
Yeah, no one listened. The only guest who's probably listened to one of the podcasts was Alex Johnson because he's 80s mate. So I don't think anyone else is going back and listening. And if they do, we'll send them something else.
I reckon Glenn Manton would have listened back to it, or maybe a Dennis Armfield. Can't imagine.
Yeah,
Russell Robinson wouldn't have. Joe Mercedes would never. He probably forgot about it an hour after. So, yeah. You're probably not far off, Rob.
My childhood idol, some of those blokes.
Yeah.
Who else did we have? We had Alan Turvey, Sandy Roberts. We had Mike Sheen, Tom Boyd. So
if you can convince Fraser Gehrig to come on, because he said no, so that'd be pretty good.
Look, one benefit of playing at a lot of clubs is you get to know a lot of blokes, but unfortunately, I haven't crossed paths with Fraser too much. So
maybe we should try and get Big Dean Cox on. I mean, he might be a bit busy doing his assistant coach duties, but maybe we can try and get him when finals are on. Yeah, because the Swans aren't playing finals, so when finals come around, we'll just see if we can get Big Cox in.
If some of the blokes I've been chatting to in the hubs, mate, if that's anything to go by, I imagine he's got a bit of free time, so you can probably do it all now.
All right, we'll try and hook that one up. Or I was thinking, Rob, we need Spang to get us to Q stick.
Oh, true, the Q. That's someone we want. Yeah.
Oh. He's over in Perth with his beautiful wife and kids. I think he's doing. I think he's insurance broker at the moment, actually, from memory. So
Big Q.
Yeah, you can definitely hit him up.
All right.
Yeah, we're going to hold on to that. We're going to get
He'll
the
probably
cue.
pay me, that's all right.
No, that's fine. Don't worry about it. Again, he won't be listening to this podcast, so it doesn't matter. Just to wrap up, Spang, we didn't have a chat about it before, but what's your situation at the moment? You're obviously married. You got kids yet? What's going on in your personal life?
No kids as yet. We got married actually in December, the end of December. So, which was, all things considered, really fortunate timing given and it's happened, in the months after. But no, mate, we're just moved back. I'm sure, kids and family certainly on the cards sooner rather than later. But I excuse me, at the moment we're just playing as it comes, enjoying isolation. Probably considering we're just in our apartment in Fitzroy, probably a good thing not to have too many little ones running around when they can't get outside.
Yeah, definitely a blessing. I've got married the weekend before COVID became a thing in Australia. So it was on March 7th, and then the following weekend, the hysteria about COVID had set in. So incredibly lucky in that respect, Spang. And Rob, your dating life's going well. Are you girlfriend and boyfriend yet?
Yeah, I think so.
He hates it. I've done it to him a few times on the podcast, but it's going really well, isn't it, Rob? Just to wrap up.
Yeah, it's great. She's a good girl. Doesn't listen to the podcast, so I can say whatever I want. So,
all right, we'll leave it there. But Spang, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. As we said, you were a cult figure at the Hawthorn Football Club. It was so great that you actually got to experience that flag after all the near misses and all the injuries, and you got the best out of yourself, even though you had to fight through a lot of adversity. So hats off to you, mate, and thanks for being such a good guest.
Oh, thanks, Jensen. I appreciate the time. Always a pleasure.